Hey, welcome back to Midas Letter Live. In this segment, we're doing something brand new. We're having a talk show style discussion, and my first guests ever in this format are Cam Battley, Chief Corporate Officer from Aurora Cannabis Inc., and our special guest is Noelle Skodzinski, and she is the corporate, what was the title again, Noelle?
Editorial Director.
Editorial Director of Cannabis Business Times and Cannabis Dispensary. Hold those up. These are the magazines that are taking the United States by storm, and we're going to see them here soon too, aren't we?
We already do.
It's a North American, both North American publications,
Okay.
so they're here.
Well, see,
yes.
I'm behind the times. Noelle, why don't we start with you? What promoted you, or what incentivized you to start a magazine surrounding cannabis in the United States at a time when it's still federally prohibited?
So the legislation started happening kind of, so things started in California, you know, in the mid-90s, and then after about 2008, 2010, things just started really picking up and spiraling as far as legalization, mostly medically. Mm-hmm. And it just, for me, I've been an editor for 20-some years, and the co-founder and I, the man who was the publisher of it, and I started as the founding editor, both felt it was kind of an advocacy thing, mm-hmm. but we both mm-hmm. come from B2B publishing, and we thought that really these businesses, especially under a federally illegal program, have so many challenges, and they had such a need for information, and especially even on the horticulture side. So Cannabis Business Times is for the professional cultivator. It's everyone from the owners. They may be the head growers as well, the head cultivators. So we do horticulture and business information.
It's a great magazine.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And even horticulturally speaking, there's not this, you know, there's not universities who've been researching this plant and developing all these, you know, research-proven techniques for maximizing yields and terpenes and cannabinoids. And so we go into cultivation information. We have PhDs who write for us from the mainstream agriculture, and we're starting to look at ways that North American growers, largely in the U.S., because there's, you know, more of them there, can apply mainstream agriculture because they're under pressure to increase their productivity. They need to bring their costs down significantly. I mean, every market that's going recreational is just seeing price drops very rapidly. So they really need to start implementing these. So that was kind of the impetus for starting it.
And you guys were very early. You were very early to this, recognizing that there was a need for real, serious, professional publishing coverage of this emerging industry. Yeah. That wasn't all snickers and winks and nods, but it was serious business. And,
right.
and
so when did it start?
2014 is we launched as a website and a newsletter first, and then we were actually bought by GIE Media, which is the B2B publishing company in Cleveland. And they have this history in B2B publishing in the mainstream agriculture market. They publish greenhouse management, produce grower, nursery management, so it just was such a perfect fit. And it's a wonderful company, and through that we were able to, so we launched the print magazine in 2015 of Cannabis Business Times. It's been monthly for 2+ years now. And then last November, we saw a very dire need among retailers. There is no publication that focused on helping cannabis dispensaries you know, navigate this very tricky business, everything from taxes to compliance to safety and security. There's so many issues that they face.
And it has a centerfold too, which I think is really interesting.
Well,
don't show that.
So Cam, as a major cannabis market participant, one of the largest in the world, has this provided to be a valuable resource for elements of your organization?
Absolutely, and more than that, the move by Cannabis Business Times and other publications into serious coverage is further validation of just how mainstream cannabis has become. This is a trend, obviously, that's been accelerating over the last few years. And the interesting thing is that there's such a thriving cannabis publication business happening in the U.S. where they haven't figured out, they haven't quit playing Hamlet as to are we
Right.
going to make this thing federally legal or not. I can't say that I'm crushed by that fact. If there's a little bit more delay that gives us more time at Aurora and some of the other leading companies to establish our world leadership, it's okay with me. But you do know that we have our eyes very squarely on that market. It's an enormous market and very,
Sure.
very interesting.
Well, so you've got quite a large interest in a company called Australis, and from the external optics, one might even say that Australis has superior access to capital by virtue of Aurora's shareholding. And so, what is the status of de-prohibition in the United States from where you guys sit in the industry?
Do you want to take a first crack at this? Because let's have our U.S. guest.
Yeah,
Sure.
Let's start with the American.
I mean, I think that the political climate around legalization is far behind the public mindset around legalization. I mean, every single poll every year, it's just increasing in support of decriminalization, legalization. I mean, medically, the numbers are 70+% of the population in the United States is in favor of medical. Those numbers are now above 60% for legalization for adult use. So, I mean, with 70%, 60% of the country behind supporting this, the legislation has just been very slow. As far as predicting when things are going to turn, it's really, I don't know that anyone particularly knows. I'd be curious, just from you have boots on the ground kind of all over the U.S., probably working with some legislators, I would imagine. And I think that the Democrats have been largely more inclined to move this direction, but I think there's also a lot of pressure now on politicians. So people who are getting reelected or running for office for the first time, they are starting to understand that the public is very much behind this, and they need to start shifting their views. Otherwise, they're going to lose majority of the vote.
It's becoming a mainstream electoral issue. Just to be clear, we are not lobbying in the U.S.
Okay.
That's not our plan. Our plan is to spin off our U.S. assets, and that's why we're creating this company, Australis Capital Corporation, which very shortly we're going to be naming the record date for that. So people who want to participate in Australis as Aurora shareholders, who are going to receive, based on a ratio, they're going to receive a share and a warrant in Australis. If they want to participate, they've got to move fairly quickly, but we'll be announcing that record date fairly shortly, and very soon after that, listing on the CSE, so that we can participate, or our shareholders rather, can participate in the U.S. market. The reason why it's so interesting is that in aggregate, the U.S. is by far the largest cannabis market in the U.S., but in aggregate, it's a fractured market though, and that's what's so fascinating, and that's part of our investment theory here, is that because it's a fragmented market, because it's not a federally legal market, it's not one single national market, there are a number of assets that are undervalued, we think significantly undervalued, that we can, through Australis, we can acquire these assets at very attractive valuations and turn them into something that will be much bigger down the line. And of course, the whole plan involves this back-in right that will allow us, should the regulations change over the next 10 years, to back into 40% ownership of Australis. So we're planning ahead. We're keeping our eyes very, very close on the U.S. market, and it's where we want to be. It's where we plan to be in the future, subject to U.S. laws and regulations.
So, from what I'm hearing, then the potential range of dates to de-prohibition, it could be in 3 months, it could be in 3 years, because it still doesn't have any solid form in a forward direction.
Right. I wouldn't expect 3 months, but I think that you're exactly right. I don't think that
Depends
it's very
on if somebody
clear.
tweets about it in
Well,
the next
that's
3
the
months.
thing. I think that right now, day to day, there are surprises in
Right.
the United States. So
Somebody
it
should
could be
whisper
3
in
months.
Donald Trump's ear that, if you really want to generate some positive press, executive order, legalize cannabis, and reconcile the disconnect between the FDA and the DEA in terms of having cannabis as a Schedule I drug on the controlled substances list.
Well, and he's a businessman. So, it's just been a little surprising to me that he kind of hasn't gotten a little more behind this politically, just for that and the economic impact that it's having in municipalities and on state levels, and
That's huge. That's
it's
huge. And I think
enormous.
that's ultimately what will be the persuader, not just in the US, but in multiple jurisdictions around the world. It's the economic development, the investment, the employment, and the innovation that's being driven by this sector. Whenever you invent a new industry, you're going to see these positive things. We're already seeing it across Canada, and it is transforming communities large and small. And we're creating new areas of science behind it. One of the reasons why we acquired Anandia Labs as well is for their deep cannabis science, for example. But I think that that's going to be persuasive not just in the US, it's going to be persuasive in multiple countries, and we're already seeing it. For example, not long ago we had a minister in a state government from Australia come to visit Aurora Sky. And she was coming to visit to learn about our medical cannabis regime, which has been used as a model for countries around the world, but also wanted to see what the company looks like, what the technology looks like. And she left, I think, exceedingly impressed as to the opportunities here, very specifically for significant new investment and employment and spin-off economic development. That's what's ultimately going to be the persuader. That plus, I think, the perception, or rather the understanding, that this is a significantly more benign substance than a lot of people have been thinking in the past. This is not tobacco, it's not alcohol, it's a lot safer than that.
Interesting. So at this point, it sounds to me like investing in the United States, which are not united on this issue at all, is more like investing in, at this point, I think it's 19 different small countries.
It's sort of like that, but it depends on what elements of the sector you're looking at. If it's technology, that's a different story, right? So producers are limited in what they can do. They can't produce in one state and sell it in another under the current regime. But the technologies, some of which are really, really exciting, everything from formulation to a million other things, to fulfillment, to there's technology around pre-rolled joints and so on. There's so many technological opportunities, and those things have worldwide potential. That's what we think is particularly interesting from an investment perspective, from an Australis perspective.
Right. In the state of California, we saw 80%, in some cases up to 80% of the product supply become uneligible for sale through the medical dispensary process or through the adult dispensary process because the tougher testing rules kicked in, and there's both a lack of testing capacity in California, and it's also been found that a lot of the growers don't measure up when it comes to non-use of pesticides and other banned substances. So is it safe to say that Australis going into the United States is not going to have that problem by virtue of its association at arm's length with Anandia Labs?
Anandia and all of the rest of the Aurora family. Absolutely. That pedigree goes with Australis. The experience of Aurora, the way we've assembled a fully integrated company, the reputation, the quality, the testing, the ability to operate under rigorous regulation. But I would say that it's beyond just Aurora. What you mentioned, I think, is important because some of the U.S. states have taken a much more relaxed approach to regulation in the past. And so we see a very large number of producers, not all of which are capable of producing cannabis under rigorous regulation and testing requirements like we have in Canada. And I think that's part of the Canadian advantage, is because of the Health Canada regulations, the tightness of those regulations we've operated under. It's part of Canada's reputation around the world with respect to cannabis. So when Aurora and Canopy and other leading companies move internationally, we take that sterling Canadian reputation with us. It's part of the Canadian advantage, I would say. Do you agree?
I do to a certain extent, and I think in a lot of states, yes, but again, because it's so fragmented, there are states that have very strict pharmaceutical level standards. Connecticut's one of them, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, even to the dispensary level, they're required to have a doctor on site, a pharmacist on site. So it is this patchwork, but they have very strict regulations in certain markets and where they limit the number of producers, and they really have to meet their, it's a medication, and some of those states are taking it at
That's the
that
right
level
way to go.
of, yes.
That's the right way to go.
Right.
And ultimately, it'd be interesting to see if that approach becomes national in the U.S. if the U.S. does move to a nationally legal system.
I mean, I think eventually it's going to have to get closer to that, even on a consumer level, because it's a consumer product, and you can't have this loose framework around it.
Even not as a medicine, but just as a consumer product.
You have to.
You can't have contaminated product out there. you can't take the risk of people
No.
getting ill. I mean, we have regulations around meat and milk and vegetables, right?
Yeah.
So we've got to have regulations around something that people consume either by combustion or ingestion, right?
For sure.
Interesting. Okay, well let's switch the focus, because it's interesting that we all happen to come together under
Yes.
a completely different set of circumstances, which resulted in this wonderful encounter. But we were basically chosen to be judges of a naming contest for the digesting machine that is the product of Micron Waste.
Right, Micron Waste's Cannabis Waste Digester.
Okay, there's why we needed to come up with a name.
Right, right. Which is
was a
all very,
mouthful.
very correct, but it's
That's
not.
not so
it's,
catchy.
No, it's not catchy or cute. So
Right.
yes, we are the judges. We're the deciders. We have to be
Right.
decisive.
Yes, well, it was interesting that we all more or less arrived at similar conclusions, because there was the one standout name that won was the Cannivore.
The Cannivore.
Yes.
Go ahead and
Cannivore.
say it.
Carnivore.
The Cannivore.
The
You wanna
Cannivore.
Which is
say it
really
in
cool.
unison?
Yeah.
Yes.
It sounds like carnivore. It's an eater of cannabis. I thought that was very, very clever. So that's the winner.
Sure. And who was the person who put forward that name? It's
Oh, let's pull it
Jack
out.
Ponte of Ontario.
Jack
I guess.
Ponte. Jack, if you're watching, well done.
Well
Yes.
done, Jack.
Nice one.
Yeah,
Nice one.
Cannivore.
Cannivore. Now, but some of the other names are worthy. Like there's a 1, 2, and 3 that we've got that. But then there's others worthy of honorable mention, which we'll get to. But what were the numbers 2 and 3?
I think one of one was the
Canosaurus
Canosaurus Rex, which was pretty cute and,
Right.
and fun. We actually had a lot of fun doing this. There were just under 2,400 entrants in this contest, and
Really?
only one
2,400?
winner. Only one winner. So Jack gets a $2,000 US cash award for being the winner. But we had some really, really good ones, and some of the fun ones you and I were talking about earlier. You had one
The
particular.
Potbelly
the
was
Potbelly.
my favorite.
That
of
was pretty
which,
cute.
You know,
I liked a bunch of them. I liked the Dank Tank. The Dank
I love
Tank
that as well.
was
yeah.
good, and some of them.
The Weed Eater was another
Weed
one
Eater.
that I liked.
Yep.
With obvious trademark challenges.
Yes. That one might have been a little bit tricky. I liked one. It was Uncanny, which I thought was kind of neat, because the digester, essentially what it does is you throw in the cannabis waste. It digests it using Micron's microbes, its proprietary set of microbes, and then out the other end comes gray water, right? But that gray water, which meets all the municipal effluent standards, and that's what makes this digester so cool, is also denatured. So the active pharmaceutical ingredients are removed. So Uncanny, I thought, was
Yeah.
quite clever as well.
Very good.
Yeah.
So
It shows people are paying attention.
yeah,
Yes,
you
they
bet.
are.
So then the purpose of the machine is to save natural resources, reduce costs in terms of waste disposal, and also conserve water, which is, a huge deal in especially places like California and Nevada.
Yeah.
Okay, so then what's you guys have one of the Cannivores is now
do.
being installed at Aurora Sky.
Actually, not just being installed. We're almost done testing, and it's looking very, very good. So at our Aurora Mountain facility, an hour north of Calgary, we've been working with the Micron engineers on validating whether this Cannivore will in fact work as anticipated in cannabis and be able to digest that cannabis waste. And it's very important, because cannabis has some pretty tough stalks, right? That's tough fibrous material, and we needed to validate that. What I'm hearing is that it's going exceedingly well, and we anticipate having some results to announce fairly soon, within weeks. I think the last steps will be ensuring that the remote operation software is bang on. But the beauty of it, and the reason why we were interested and why Aurora made a strategic investment in Micron Waste, is that it ticks off a lot of boxes for us. We have this cannabis waste, and currently cannabis waste from licensed producers is disposed of in a number of ways, everything from incineration to composting to the so-called kitty litter method, where the cannabis waste is mixed with cat litter and water to make it unusable, and then sent off to landfills.
Yep.
But this digester works on site. It's small, compact, and you throw the cannabis waste in, you get clean water out the other end. There's no need to transport it. There's no need to incinerate it. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and it gives us water that can go back into the system. So it's environmentally friendly, cheaper, greener, more convenient, what's better than that?
No kidding. So do you anticipate that this is going to be a device that all the cannabis growers are going to want to consider putting into their process?
I'm told by Micron that they're getting calls all the time from licensed producers, and not just Canadian cannabis companies, but cannabis producers and prospective producers in the U.S. and around the world.
Right.
So it's obviously a very timely solution, and the interesting thing is that's just one of the markets that Micron is targeting. They're also targeting very large markets like supermarket waste and fast food waste.
Okay.
This one just happens to be cannabis specific, and it allowed us to have some fun.
Yeah. So what's happening with all the cannabis waste now?
It's all being sent to your house at the end of the week.
I was wondering what that big pile was I had to climb every day to get to the front door.
Yeah, so like I say, some of it is incinerated, and there are
Okay.
challenges with that. A lot of it is composted at municipal compost locations, but that's problematic too, because anytime you have to truck waste anywhere, you're creating additional greenhouse gas emissions, and you're also creating additional cost. And the other thing about when you compost cannabis, it can take a month or more.
Right.
Whereas the digester is able to process all of that waste in 24 to 48 hours. So it's faster, doesn't create the smell, and it's a very, very elegant solution to a challenge that is increasing as the cannabis industry grows.
And I'm assuming that that the composting of cannabis, that process in and of itself generates methane, which is one of the most virulent greenhouse gases that we have to deal
Significantly more so than carbon dioxide.
Right.
And the other interesting thing is this: the digestion of the cannabis waste in the digester. One of the things it does create is some carbon dioxide. You're going to have to deal with that whenever you're dealing with organic waste materials. But actually, future versions of this digester may be able to capture that carbon dioxide, and guess which industry uses carbon dioxide to enhance yields? That would be us.
Cannabis.
So there's a lot of future potential there too. It's pretty exciting.
Okay, that's great. Thank you guys very much for joining me. Before we go though, Noelle, how do we buy Cannabis Dispensary magazine and Cannabis Times magazines?
So they're both actually free to qualified subscribers. So if you are a
Would he qualify?
you may not qualify. I'll try to get you on a special list.
Oh, okay.
But,
I am going to grow 4 plants. And I used to have quite a bit of I was actually one of the first commercial growers in BC.
Oh.
No, I'm not serious about that.
So yes, it's free.
Okay.
So if you are a cultivator or a dispensary in North America, you can sign up on our websites, cannabisbusinesstimes.com and cannabisdispensarymag.com. So we also have newsletters. We just increased the frequency of our newsletter for Cannabis Business Times to 3 times a week because there's so much news to cover in North America. There's so much happening that we just have to keep updating people. So we've got free newsletters that anyone can subscribe to. We've got digital editions in the magazine. You can download the app in the Android store of the magazines, you know, the websites.
And I can recommend it. It's a good read.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for joining me both. We'll be back right after this with another interview with Cam Battley about Aurora.
That's me.